At 4:17 a.m. Gulf Standard Time, radar systems along the Persian Gulf light up. Naval vessels reposition. Energy futures spike before most of the world wakes up. And within minutes, oil markets begin pricing in something catastrophic. Not speculation, not politics, but war. A direct military confrontation with Iran. And here's the reality no politician wants to admit. A war with Iran would not be a regional conflict. It would be a global economic suicide event. This is News 6 Brief. And today, we're breaking down the suicidal folly of a war with Iran. If you're new here, News 6 Brief delivers clear, strategic geopolitical analysis without emotional noise. No sensationalism. No propaganda. Just facts, incentives, and consequences. Because in geopolitics, the loudest voices are usually the least analytical. Let's break this down step by step. Before anyone talks about limited strikes, they need to understand scale. Iran is not Iraq in 2003. Iran has a population of over 85 million, one of the largest missile arsenals in the Middle East, extensive drone capabilities, cyber warfare infrastructure, strategic influence across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. And most importantly, Iran controls the northern side of the Strait of Hormuz. That changes everything. The Strait of Hormuz is only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Through it flows nearly 20% of the world's oil supply. Let that sink in. 1 out of every 5 barrels of oil passes through that corridor. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar. If conflict escalates and Iran disrupts shipping, even temporarily, oil prices don't rise gradually. They explode. $150 oil becomes plausible. $200 oil becomes possible. Energy markets move on fear, not confirmation. Let's remove ideology and focus on math. If oil spikes above $150, gasoline prices surge, transportation costs rise, food prices climb, airlines raise fares, manufacturing costs increase, inflation reaccelerates. Central banks would be forced into impossible decisions. Raise rates to control inflation and risk recession, or cut rates and risk currency collapse. There is no painless option, and markets hate uncertainty. Within hours of confirmed escalation, expect stock market sell-offs, gold surges, treasury volatility, currency swings. Your 401k would feel it before the evening news finishes reporting it. A limited strike sounds clean in political speeches. In reality, there is no such thing as a clean Gulf conflict. Iran has invested heavily in asymmetric deterrence, anti-ship missiles, drone swarms, fast naval attack craft, underground missile facilities. If attacked, retaliation would likely be immediate and layered. Missile exchanges, drone deployments, cyber attacks, regional proxy activation. Escalation would not be optional. It would be automatic. Modern war is not just kinetic. Imagine this scenario. Energy company networks disrupted. Shipping navigation systems glitch. Financial clearing systems experience outages. Banking platforms freeze temporarily. You don't need bombs falling in Manhattan for panic to begin. Digital disruption is enough. And attribution in cyber warfare is rarely instant, which means confusion compounds fear. Geopolitics never happens in isolation. China imports massive quantities of Gulf energy. Russia monitors any U.S. military engagement closely. A prolonged U.S.-Iran war shifts global focus away from Eastern Europe and the Pacific. It reshapes strategic bandwidth. Every major power recalculates when America becomes militarily absorbed. This isn't about alliances. It's about opportunity. Scenario 1, rapid de-escalation. A brief exchange. Strong rhetoric. Diplomatic backchannels engage. Shipping continues under military escort. Markets stabilize after volatility. Damage, temporary but painful. Scenario 2, energy shock spiral. Missile strikes impact Gulf infrastructure. Shipping insurance skyrockets. Oil crosses $180. Global recession risk spikes. Central banks intervene aggressively. Inflation returns with force. Scenario 3, prolonged regional conflict. Sustained naval tension. Periodic missile exchanges. Regional militias activate. Cyber disruptions continue. Oil remains structurally elevated. Global supply chains reconfigure. Permanent economic scars form. War changes domestic politics. High gas prices affect voters. Inflation shifts elections. Budget deficits widen. Defense spending increases. Debt servicing costs rise. In democracies, economic pain translates into political volatility. Foreign policy always returns home. The greatest danger is not intentional escalation. It's miscalculation. One misread radar signal. One misinterpreted missile launch. One cyber event blamed prematurely. In high-tension environments, reaction times shrink. And short reaction windows increase error probability. History shows wars often expand through misjudgment, not master plans. The phrase suicidal folly is not dramatic. It is structural. Because the global economy is fragile. Energy markets are tight. Debt levels are historically high. Inflation risks remain. Political systems are polarized. Inject a major energy shock into that equation, and the system strains everywhere. No country escapes the consequences. Not the US. Not Europe. Not Asia. Not even oil producers immune to demand collapse. This is not 1991. The world is far more interconnected now. A war with Iran would not just be about military capability. It would test global energy stability, financial market resilience, political leadership, strategic patience. Deterrence requires strength, but wisdom requires restraint. Because in a tightly interconnected world, escalation is rarely contained. The cost would not be measured only in missiles fired. It would be measured in economic contraction, inflation spikes, financial panic, and global instability. That is the true risk. And that is why a war with Iran would not be a show of strength. It would be a gamble with consequences no leader can fully control. Before we close this briefing entirely, we need to go deeper. Because most public conversations about a potential war with Iran stop at military comparisons. They talk about aircraft carriers. They talk about missile ranges. They talk about troop numbers. But modern power is not just measured in firepower. It is measured in economic resilience, strategic depth, and escalation tolerance. And that's where the situation becomes far more dangerous than most people realize. Let's walk through something slowly and methodically. If the Strait of Hormuz is disrupted, even partially, oil prices spike. That part is obvious. But what happens next is what truly matters. Oil is not just fuel for cars. Oil is embedded in plastics, pharmaceuticals, fertilizers, packaging, aviation, shipping, manufacturing, asphalt, petrochemicals. When oil rises sharply, it does not just affect drivers. It affects supply chains at every stage. Food becomes more expensive not only because of transportation, but because fertilizer production relies heavily on energy inputs. Airlines raise ticket prices. Shipping companies increase freight costs. Retailers pass those costs on to consumers. Inflation, which central banks have been fighting aggressively, would reignite almost immediately. And once inflation expectations rise again, reversing them becomes exponentially harder. That is the domino effect. Now imagine being a central bank governor in this environment. Oil spikes. Inflation accelerates. Markets become volatile. Bond yields rise. You face two options. Raise interest rates to control inflation, risking recession. Lower interest rates to stabilize markets, risking currency devaluation and runaway prices. This is what economists call a policy trap. There is no clean escape. The 1970s oil shock demonstrated how energy-driven inflation can persist for years. It reshaped global economic policy for a generation. A Gulf conflict today would hit an already fragile global system burdened by record debt levels. Governments are far less flexible than they were decades ago. Debt servicing costs are already elevated. Add higher rates on top of that, and fiscal stress compounds quickly. War is expensive. Even limited engagement requires naval deployments, missile defense systems, logistics support, surveillance operations, intelligence coordination. All of it costs money. Governments finance wars through borrowing. Borrowing increases deficits. Higher deficits require higher bond issuance. If bond markets are already volatile because of energy shocks, borrowing becomes more expensive. That increases interest payments, which expands deficits further. This feedback loop is dangerous, and markets are forward-looking. If investors anticipate prolonged instability, they demand higher yields immediately. One of the least discussed but most critical variables is insurance. Maritime insurance companies reassess risk zones quickly. If the Persian Gulf is designated high risk, insurance premiums for tankers skyrocket. Some shipping companies may temporarily halt operations rather than absorb excessive risk. Even a temporary pause disrupts global supply chains. We saw how fragile logistics networks can be during recent global crises. Ports back up. Containers sit idle. Factories slow down. Consumers face shortages. Now imagine that dynamic combined with an energy shock. The system strains everywhere at once. Let's expand on the cyber dimension. Iran has invested significantly in cyber capabilities. In modern conflict, cyber retaliation offers strategic ambiguity. Power grids can experience outages. Financial institutions can face disruptions. Industrial control systems can malfunction. These actions do not always trigger immediate military retaliation because attribution takes time. But the psychological effect is powerful. Markets respond instantly to uncertainty. If major financial institutions experience coordinated cyber incidents during heightened geopolitical tension, investors assume escalation. Confidence evaporates quickly, and confidence is the foundation of financial systems. Another layer most commentators overlook is proxy activation. Iran maintains relationships with multiple regional actors. In the event of direct confrontation, pressure would not remain confined to one geographic zone. Multiple fronts could become active. Missile exchanges may extend beyond the immediate Gulf. This forces military planners to divide attention and resources. It increases unpredictability. And unpredictability is what markets fear most. The broader the geographic footprint of tension, the harder it becomes to contain. Military power is finite. Attention is finite. Logistical capacity is finite. If the United States becomes deeply engaged in the Gulf, strategic bandwidth shifts. Other regions observe closely. Competitors calculate differently when American resources are reallocated. This is not speculation. It is standard geopolitical analysis. Great powers must prioritize. Simultaneous high-intensity commitments strain even the strongest militaries. Economic stress translates into political stress. High gasoline prices affect voters directly. Rising food costs hit household budgets. Stock market declines impact retirement savings. Mortgage rates influence housing markets. All of these factors shape public opinion rapidly. Political leaders often enter conflict expecting short-term unity. But prolonged economic pain erodes that unity quickly. Polarization deepens. Elections become referendums on foreign policy decisions. This internal volatility affects diplomatic flexibility. Leaders under domestic pressure are less able to compromise, which can prolong conflict. Allies matter, but alliances are influenced by economic exposure. If European economies are severely impacted by energy disruptions, domestic pressure mounts there as well. Public opinion shifts. Coalition cohesion weakens. Energy dependency shapes diplomatic posture. Every allied government must balance strategic loyalty with domestic economic stability. That balancing act becomes harder when energy prices spike and growth slows. In times of geopolitical crisis, capital seeks safety. Historically, that has meant US Treasuries, gold, the US dollar. But what happens if the crisis directly involves major oil-producing routes and US military engagement? Gold likely surges. Volatility indexes spike. The dollar may initially strengthen due to safe haven flows. But prolonged conflict combined with rising deficits and inflation could reverse that. Currency markets are complex. Short-term reactions differ from long-term structural shifts. Sustained instability erodes fiscal confidence. And currency confidence is tied to fiscal stability. Some argue renewable energy reduces vulnerability. That is partially true long-term. But current global infrastructure still relies heavily on fossil fuels. Electric grids require stability. Battery production requires minerals. Transportation networks are still oil-dependent at scale. Transition is gradual. Shock is immediate. The world cannot pivot energy systems overnight in response to conflict. One of the most underestimated elements in geopolitics is psychology. Markets are not purely mathematical systems. They are emotional systems reacting to information. Leaders are not purely rational actors. They are influenced by domestic audiences, historical narratives, and national pride. Miscalculation often stems from overconfidence. Both sides may believe escalation will deter rather than provoke. Both sides may assume the other will blink first. History shows that assumption can be catastrophically wrong. There is a difference between managing a crisis and riding its momentum. Managing a crisis requires clear communication, back-channel diplomacy, defined red lines, controlled rhetoric. Momentum-driven escalation occurs when public statements harden positions, domestic audiences demand toughness, retaliation becomes expected. Once momentum builds, slowing it becomes politically costly. That is when crises spiral. The most dangerous scenario is not a massive opening strike. It is a prolonged, simmering confrontation. Periodic naval incidents, occasional missile launches, cyber disruptions, elevated energy prices, constant uncertainty. Over time, markets adjust to a higher risk premium. That means permanently higher borrowing costs, permanent supply chain rerouting, permanent defense spending increases. These structural shifts reshape global economics for years. We are living in an era of heightened geopolitical tension. Supply chains are already strained. Global debt is historically elevated. Political systems are polarized. Trust between major powers is limited. Injecting a Gulf conflict into that environment multiplies risk. This is not about one battlefield. It is about systemic stability. This has been an extended New 6 Brief Deep Dive.